Hello, everyone, and welcome back to NextDev.fm. My name is Ryan Vogel, and I'm joined by my co-host here today.
Dan Goosewood.
And today we are joined by a very special guest, Shane from Mastra. How are you doing today, Shane?
I'm doing pretty good. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So we'll jump right into it. Give us the 2-minute play-by-play on how you basically got into code, and then more eventually like AI tooling. But how did you originally get into code because there's a lot of different ways that we've heard about. Maybe it's like you've wanted to hack a game engine or something like that. So what was your sort of entry into how you got into this lovely world of development?
Yeah, I'm sure it is probably parallels a lot of people. So I remember, when I was first of all, my mom was very big into all the smart people I know are into computers, so we should have a computer. So we just always, from an early, I'm a little older than some people. So it was late elementary school, middle school when we finally got a computer, and it was just, so we always had something for me to tinker around with. I wasn't really coding though. I think the first time I really was coding anything is I had a TI 83 plus calculator, and I wanted to build a text adventure game because someone was showing me that, oh, you can write code. So I was literally writing code on the calculator, so I had this text adventure game I built, and I had my friends play it. Of course, I didn't even know how to share it with anybody, but I built it, and it was actually pretty cool. And I remember the first version was just a straight, you just basically go down. It was pretty linear. And then eventually I figured out, I could create this loop, create a game loop. And so eventually you got to a point in the game where you entered an arena and you could level up, right? Because it would have a loop where you're just battling. And this is all just a text adventure game on a TI 83 plus. But I think then, in that, and then of course, took a programming class. Honestly, the funny thing is I signed up for 2 programming classes. I think it was my junior or senior year in high school. And after the first semester, I tried to drop out of the second one and swap it for a gym class because I was I just felt dumb. I just felt like I didn't get it. So even though I had programmed my calculator, even though it was Java, I felt it was a combination of probably the teacher wasn't that familiar with it. So a lot of people had questions he couldn't answer. He was definitely knew stuff about computers, but wasn't necessarily the best computer programmer. Right. And so I think that, originally I tried to get out of it, but then by the end of the second semester, I was feeling okay, I actually finally clicked at some point. And so I'm very thankful that my high school did not let me cancel that second class, because who knows what would happen then.
Right. And you said it was Java you were programming in?
Yeah, I had a Java class in high school.
I see. That's pretty cool. Do you feel like Java is the right programming language for teaching programming?
I don't know. I would say probably there are probably better programming language to start out with than Java. That would be my take on it.
What would you recommend? If you could restart and start with a programming language, what would it be?
I don't know. I mean, as much as I don't, I'm not a huge Python fan. Python's pretty easy to pick up and just play around with, That's probably a good starting spot. I think, yeah, it's relatively approachable. I don't really, I much prefer other things now, but I think as a getting started point, that's probably a good way to start. I think, once I got into web dev and I was writing stuff for the browser, obviously JavaScript is good, but it's also, it's kind of confusing as well. So I think it just depends, but I would say, Python's not bad. Basic scripting languages are probably easier to start with than, more object-oriented, languages.
Right. You have a long track record in open source space, and I am really, really curious to hear why you got into it and what keeps you going in open source space. Why do you keep betting in open source?
Yeah, I first started in open source probably in 2009, 2010, somewhere in that range. And so I was basically building websites for clients. And, someone that I was, kind of knew from college had recommended, you should use, Drupal for this. And so I just got into building Drupal websites. and we, you know, started a business. We were, you know, we grew it to like 5 people on the team, and we had, you know, quite a few customers and clients. But it really, you know, I ended up having to, you know, fix things. I ended up building a bunch of like educational content on stuff that I was learning. So I had a YouTube channel. Didn't grow it huge or anything, but, you know, I had 10,000 subscribers or something like that. So I, you know, did a lot of content. I basically was like, I'm going to post a video a day for 100 days. And then just so I can like learn about
Wait.
and teach.
How old were you?
So this was like, I was probably just out of college. So
And you didn't think 10,000 subscribers was like big? Man, you
well,
are
I mean,
humble, dude. You are, you
well,
know, I got a check for like $8 million. It was
yeah,
nothing.
no. Well, I mean, okay, big. It was big for me. I thought it was pretty cool, but obviously, compared to, you know, more traditional
Right,
YouTube
yeah.
influencers, it was very small. So, but I, you know, I did it for a few years where I was, you know, of course, building websites for clients, but also posting a lot of content and trying to be helpful, and, you know, did have some like info products that I did sell a little bit, but it was mostly around just like trying to provide value back to the community. And I spent a lot of time going to like Drupal events. I would say like as an open source community, you know, this was what, 15 years ago now. Drupal was a very, very well maintained open source community. And of course it's, you know, the web has changed, things have changed a little bit, but I still will always appreciate, you know, Drupal kind of getting me into open source.
Right. You mentioned Drupal means you have a bunch of experience writing in PHP. Is that accurate?
Yes. I've
Have you
spent a lot.
dabbled with WordPress?
I've used some WordPress. Yep. But I definitely spent more time with Drupal, but yeah, I've done enough with WordPress to be dangerous for sure.
All right. WordPress doesn't do a whole lot of open source stuff. I think WooCommerce is open source, right? But not the core.
Well, I mean, WordPress has open source components to it for sure.
Yeah.
So I would consider like, you know, that you can run WordPress. I think it is open source, at least parts of it. But then, you know, you have different providers. Like, you know, the WordPress.com is maybe slightly different than the WordPress engine that you can download and run locally. But of course, there's components of open source, I think, in WordPress too. But I always think of WordPress as for, you know, it's kind of more for marketers, and Drupal always felt more for developers, in my opinion. And so I think that's, yeah. But also why WordPress was, you know, significantly larger, right? As a bigger audience for sure.
Yeah. I have to be completely honest with you. You're the first person I've met who's like pivoted to Drupal. Like majority of people were in the WordPress space, right? Making
I mean,
WordPress
it was
themes
way
and
bigger.
plugins. Yeah,
it
it was
way bigger. I think it was just the community was, you know, in hindsight, maybe I should have done more WordPress. Commercially, it probably made more sense, but it was, again, just the open source community of Drupal was much more enticing to me at the time.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. You have a history building websites for various use cases. You have experience building out a CMS. And I'm really, really curious if that contributed at all to you ending up at Gatsby and working on one of the coolest React-based frameworks in history, I would say, in my humble opinion.
I would say it directly led to me getting to Gatsby. So, you know, candidly, I was at I was working at an agency at the time, Third and Grove in Boston. Great agency, does a lot of Drupal, Shopify, all kinds of great digital services. But I was at a conference and I met one of the founders of Gatsby, some of the other employees that were at Gatsby at the time, and because I had still had a background in Drupal, Gatsby was trying to integrate with every CMS to make it, because Gatsby had this really cool data layer concept where you could basically pull in data from a CMS, you could access with GraphQL, and then you could build your templates and your pages from that, just accessing it through GraphQL. And so I was, you know, working on kind of the integration between Drupal and Gatsby, and I was doing that while I was at this agency. And then eventually I applied for a job at Gatsby. I was like, well, I have some background in kind of management. So I applied for a management position, never got an interview. And then eventually I talked to Kyle, the founder, and he said, you know, oh, we have a new position opening that you might be interested in. And so it's kind of a position around like the open source side, connecting to CMSs, mentioned Drupal in the position. And so I was like, well, throw my hat in the ring for that. And then it pretty quickly moved to me joining the team full time.
Right. So how long were you at Gatsby after you joined the team full time?
So I was at Gatsby. Time is difficult, but I think it was
Right,
like
yeah, no.
maybe 3.5 years or so until the acquisition by Netlify, something like that. So
And
yeah,
you kind of stayed on like when you got there, you kind of stayed on like the same sort of stuff, or did you kind of jump around a
no,
lot?
I jumped all over at Gatsby. I started as just a staff engineer working mostly on kind of the CMS integrations. And then eventually I became an engineering manager, and then eventually a senior engineering manager. And then eventually I led product on kind of what's now called Netlify Connect, but was originally called kind of codenamed Valhalla, which is, I like to think of one of the main reasons Netlify wanted Gatsby was for the product that we were kind of building towards the end of there, which is essentially like a data layer of sorts.
Right. So I feel like that's nice though, where you're not just on one thing and you kind of get to jump around a little bit. I feel like that makes the stay at any company a little bit easier because you're not just stuck on one product or one little niche. But after you left Gatsby, you joined. You worked on audio feed, right?
So yeah, I was at Netlify for a bit, probably I think 8-9 months after.
Oh, you stayed through the
I
acquisition of
I
it.
stayed through the acquisition for maybe 9 months, and then I decided, okay, time to kind of reinvigorate the entrepreneur side. Because in the past, like I said, I ran a web agency. I did some other entrepreneurial ventures, some modestly successful, some complete failures, as expected. But so I kind of was like, now's a good time. So I'm really interested in all the things that were going on with AI. I had been kind of playing around with, during my time in Netlify, starting to keep an eye on what was going on, and was really interested in just building around AI, and actually wanted to build kind of like a dev tool. And then I was like, well, I need a product to actually prove that the dev tool works. So then I started building audio feed, and then audio feed became the thing I was building, right? And so I had a dev tool platform that only I used, but I built it. Eventually that was supposed to be the thing, but it never materialized. And so yeah, I spent a decent amount of time building audio feed out, and I think ultimately still not a bad idea, and it's still up today, but it was just very early at the time. And now there's other products that are even, much more further along, because I just haven't been
Right.
working on it recently. But it was kind of I would say a little bit ahead of its time of what people were comfortable with when it came to AI.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I definitely because what year was this? This
would have been like 2.5 years ago, maybe 2 years ago. Yeah, the
so that was
20. It was like right after. So I'm trying to think. Like 2.5 years ago is when like Stable Diffusion dropped, and that's when I started to get really
right.
interested in it. And so it was probably about 2 years ago, I would say, is when I was really working pretty heavily on audio feed.
So it was before the ChatGPT launch, right? I think
No, it would have been right at. It was kind of pretty close to
right
after.
after. Man,
Because
time is so
I was,
weird.
yeah, I mean, time is, yeah, it's hard for me to know exactly, but I think it was about, yeah, it's about 2 years that I really started working on audio feed.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so weird the way time, because I was like, ChatGPT released like a year ago, right? Oh no, it's been
Yeah, it's been like
almost
2.5
years.
Yeah, it was like when the API from ChatGPT first started to be popular, because it used, and it was when like 11 Labs was really just getting started. Like it was still pretty popular, but it's kind of all based on OpenAI's APIs plus 11 Labs APIs, and it was before. So I launched audio feed before OpenAI had voice. So
Okay.
Really interesting.
yeah, and then we added like the ability to kind of swap between 11 Labs and OpenAI voice in audio feed, because OpenAI voice was a lot cheaper than 11 Labs.
Yep. I can only imagine what it feels like to be at a startup doing something and then getting eliminated by one feature announcement at like OpenAI conference or whatever. That was
Yeah.
feel horrible.
Yeah, and that was kind of, ultimately a lot of what you could do with audio feed, you can now do with just 11 Labs or other tools pretty easily. I mean, there's still some other competitors that do, what audio feed does, and they're doing seemingly fairly well. It's hard to tell from the outside. So I think there's still a use case, but the main draw of audio feed was it started out as basically you have people, someone sends you an article, you can turn it into like your own personal podcast. So you would just like send off a link, and then you'd have a podcast that'd show up in Apple Podcasts or whatever. That'd be just your content. So that's how it started.
Like a modern day, what is it, Notebook LM or something like that from
Yeah,
Google.
right. But instead of just like having like nice two hosts, because that didn't really work, it would either summarize the article for you or just read you the whole article. You could kind of pick. And so that's how it started. And then from there, it was like, well, consumers aren't going to pay enough for what it costs to actually generate this audio. So what about businesses and being able to allow businesses to take their existing written content and make audio versions of it, or make podcasts from that content? And so that was kind of the vision, and had a few people using it, still do. There's still a few users, but it's definitely kind of on the, maintenance mode. So it still exists for the people that use it, but it's not actively being developed anymore.
I see. What would you say was the biggest discovery takeaway from shipping consumer facing AI app before the agents took off and everybody jumped on the train?
Yeah, I think it was, for me, the takeaway was like timing is important, because I think it was just way too early. I mean, no one was really comfortable 2 years ago with the idea that AI is going to read them something. And I would still argue people are not comfortable with it, but they're getting more comfortable with it, right? They're more comfortable with it today with like Notebook LM and some of these other tools, right? So I think it was quite a bit early for, and so I think timing does really matter. But when it comes to consumers, also, like, price point does matter too, because there's no way to make any money, because no way there's a consumer that would want to pay the costs of the the audio generation, not at
Right.
that scale.
And I think there was also, like, I know at least for me, but back maybe, I want to say maybe like a year ago ish, where it was like the GPT 3.5 Turbo and like the early days of GPT 4, where the hallucinations, the overconfident hallucinations, were just so bad that I would put in like a school article or something like that, and it would just confidently give me the complete wrong answer. And I think a lot of us seasoned AI vets have PTSD from that, where it's like, yeah, let me go ahead and create this file, and it deletes the entire code base, and you're just like, oh.
Yeah, I mean, and it's better today, but it's still there are still moments like that.
Right.
Yeah. Like in Claude 3.7 release, I feel like this became very apparent. I don't know if you have experience vibe coding or using agentic mode with like cursor and whatnot, but this really like showed up for me really apparently.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I see it quite a bit with, anytime I use cursor, windsurf, depending on what I'm doing, that if I always like to tell people, like, when I'm using windsurf, the stop button is my friend. I just stop it halfway and say, you are not doing, you're going off the rails,
You had to roll it for a second, but then it's like,
Yeah.
okay, why? Because I was just on Dan about this earlier, but I was messing with some AWS CLI stuff with cursor, and the way that those those commands get run, like AWS Lambda list dot functions or whatever, it kind of opens like a Vim style. I don't know what that's called, like a Vim style text editor component where you can kind of scroll. And I'm looking through the log right here, 23 times it just said, let me retry to do this another way. Let me try to do this another way. And it kept going and going and going. And the last one, because I happened to glance over at it, it tried to launch a Puppeteer instance to go to the AWS console and snag the session from my Chrome browser to then do like retrieval on like if the S3 bucket exists or not. And I'm like, buddy, what? Ask me. Don't be trying to like reverse engineer like the Chromium SDK to like find the value. That's one thing I wish AI would do. I wish it would say, hey, can you go grab these values at like the top of like the response, and then it says, I'm gonna go work on this stuff async, and then whenever you get it, just spit it back at me or something like that. I don't know. That was my rant because I just saw the Puppeteer instance and I was like, now I've got to go through every file you've changed and nitpick what was good, what was bad. And I was like, oh, it's just going to cause like 10 times more problems. But yeah, you got to monitor it.
Yeah, for sure.
I do have to say Cloud 4 got a lot better in that regard, in my experience at the very least. I don't know how you feel about it.
But here's the thing. My pain point with Claude 3.7 is, and I'm sure everyone here can relate this, everyone listening, is it will deploy any change and then instantly try to create a README file for it. And that, I don't know why, but that just like made me have this internal rage that whenever I saw that, I just got so mad at it. Like I could be having a perfectly good day, but then I see, let me generate some documentation. I didn't say that. So Claude 4 is good with shorter context, but once the context length starts to get up there, I saw it generate a README file, and I was like, you're base 3.7. You're not base 3.5. That's bad. But yeah. 4 is an improvement, though.
Sure. So talking vibe coding, talking hallucinating language models, you have jumped into software development in this space earlier than others. What was the exact aha moment that got you to decide I need to build Mastra?
So the moment that, well, that's a long story. Two parts I'll say. Like what got me into I need to build in this AI, I need to spend time learning this generative AI thing was, so I had a buddy who basically spun up a stable diffusion server and, had on his phone, had a little app on his phone, right, where we were generating images. I just remember like sitting there honestly over a beer, and he's like, hey, check this out. And I was like, this is pretty wild. Like I'd seen, like Dolly and stuff, and it was like, okay, that's kind of cool. But this was like, oh, this is just running on your machine. So it kind of felt like the open source movement again, where I'm like, oh, people are running their own things with this. That's very interesting to me. So I think that got me hooked into generative AI, like at the beginning. And then how we got to Mastra is, so after I left Netlify, I was doing the audio feed thing. My co-founder Sam had also left Netlify, and my other co-founder Abi was still there, but Sam was kind of starting to build a CRM. Ultimately, he wanted to kind of build an AI-powered modern CRM. So really well designed, had kind of AI tooling from the beginning. But I eventually like was helping him out as I was building audio feed, and then he just said, why don't you just come on as a co-founder? And then we brought Abi on as well, and we were trying to build this CRM. And what we ran into is, okay, we built a okay product, it was fine, but we kept trying to running into these hurdles of trying to build the AI parts and actually getting them to work the way we wanted to. And so one day we just kind of sat back and said, we all were at Gatsby. We're kind of dev tools guys. Why are we trying to build a CRM when clearly building this AI stuff doesn't have the tooling, especially not for like JavaScript, TypeScript devs that we need? And so I think, it was back in October when we basically said the tooling for this needs to be better. And that's when we kind of made the full pivot to say, okay, we're going to build Mastra.
So I guess the let's hear the 10-second elevator pitch. Why choose Mastra? Why choose Mastra rather than like LangChain or everything or anything else?
Yeah. Okay. So for those that don't know, Mastra's open source AI agent framework for TypeScript. But I think, you kind of have a lot of choices. There's a lot of agent frameworks, right? One, I think you should question whether you need an agent framework. First of all, I think in a lot of cases, it's helpful to have the scaffolding so you don't have to make as many decisions, but you should know the basics of like calling LLMs and all that before you pull a framework off the shelf, or you're not going to really know what's going on under the hood. You should have a base level understanding of just how LLMs work. But a framework can help you get further faster. So if you really want to build something that's maintainable, that other people can come in to the project and work with, that's when frameworks can really be beneficial. And there are a lot of other frameworks. Most other frameworks are kind of at least originally built for Python. And so, like I don't want this to be hate on LangChain live stream, but I don't think that most frameworks, there aren't very many good examples of frameworks that span multiple languages. And the problem is pretty simple. If you're using one language and you're searching for something, you now often end up on the wrong docs. So we use LangChain for when we're building the CRM, and we were so frustrated we decided we had to build something better.
I see. That makes a lot of sense. Whenever I tell people about Master, and that happens like all the time, I gotta tell you, I'm a big fan. I basically introduced Master as just LangChain of TypeScript ecosystem and better. That's it.
Yeah.
It was, yeah.
And I do think that more and more people are moving, or maybe not even moving, just more and more TypeScript developers are trying to build in AI, right? And so it's not that they're even moving, it's just that there's going to be a lot of people that have projects that are in Python that come from a Python background, and there's going to be a lot of people that were like me, web devs building, React apps, and now they're realizing, okay, well, I need to add AI to this, and they're going to want to choose a JavaScript or TypeScript framework that's going to help them get further.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I know that Mastra is, I would call it a heavy wrapper around Vercel SDK. It builds on Vercel SDK
Yes.
primitives. Do you ever feel like you have to fight the constraints of their SDK, or do you ever regret the decision to build around their primitives?
I would say, like, originally we tried to do the model routing ourselves, and we realized that, okay, and AI SDK does a pretty good job of making it swappable, right? So you could swap to any model, and it does have kind of the baked in tool calling, which we could leverage. And so what we realized is we can either basically build the same thing that they've been spending a lot of time building and have to maintain all of that. And we kind of, for a while there, we did kind of wrap it in a way that basically hid that we were using AI SDK, not maliciously, just that we thought we needed to kind of own the routing layer. So it's not like we didn't want people to know it. It's just that we wanted to have our own like kind of layer on top of it. And we just decided, no, let's just explicitly use AI SDK and make it very clear that that's what we're using under the hood. And so far, I don't think we've run into any real constraints. Of course, anytime you choose a library, you're kind of, you're dealing with API decisions that library, or SDK is made. But overall, I don't think it's really limited us. I think it's actually allowed us to get further a lot faster.
Did you see the new AI SDK, the Vercel, what is it, gateway or whatever, the AI gateway?
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't have a ton of opinions on it. I think there's so many AI gateway products. It kind of makes sense for an infra provider like Vercel to just have one. But it's also like I can think of a half a dozen off the top of my head, and I could find a dozen others, I'm sure, if I just looked. So I think
Right.
it does make sense for like someone that has like infra and hosting to probably have some kind of AI gateway like that. But I don't have strong opinions on it. I haven't seen anyone using it yet for any big use cases. I'm sure there will be, especially if they're already choosing Vercel. There
Right.
might be reasons. I think that I don't yet know how many people are like hot swapping models without changing the prompts or without like testing prompt changes and things like that. But I do think there are probably some people that do it.
Yep.
Yeah, because I do think that you can't use the same prompt on every model, no matter how much you adapt it to be like global, because every model has its sort of niche things where it's like with Claude, you got to be more instructive, whereas with like a GPT model, you got to be more like very, very strict, saying, hey, you got to adhere to these standards and whatnot. But no, yeah, I agree. And for anyone that's listening and you don't know what the AI gateway is, it's basically makes it so that way you can just have this provider function, and you can pass in essentially any sort of model name. So you could pass in GPT 4.1, or you could pass in Claude 4 or whatever, and it would just auto update all the code, or not the code, but like the handling of like tool calls, image calls, and everything like that to just auto be updated. But yeah, so obviously with all this vibe code and AI generated code, the tests that are sort of becoming of those aren't really existing. Like a lot of devs are just shipping, but they're not really shipping like cumulative tests. So what do you think like good test coverage looks like for agents?
That's a tough question because I don't
I
know
know
that that's a really tough, that's a loaded question for sure. I think that a lot of people, especially, it just kind of depends on the stage that uh, that you're at. Because I think in the early entry level, if you're just starting building an agent, you're just kind of dealing with LLMs. You're dealing with the, like handling responses, and then eventually you're like, okay, well, I need some kind of observability for this stuff. So then you're carrying a little bit of observability. Then eventually you kind of graduate to, okay, well, I actually need to care about, is this like hallucinating? Is it giving the right responses? So then eventually you graduate to like evals. And then, eventually from there you start caring about, okay, not only is it giving me the right response, but like how secure is it? So then if you get to like enterprise level, you're starting to care about like security and things like that. And so I think it's a layered approach for sure. I mean, I would argue that more people should care about evals earlier and trying to like build some kind of data set that you test. And like, I always think about there's kind of like two flavors of testing with evals. It's like some kind of CI test that anytime you change a system prompt, you run some data set and you get some scores, and it gives you a little bit of just at least confirmation that things aren't getting worse. You're not regressing, but it's because it's AI, and especially if you're taking some kind of user prompt, there's no such thing as 100% test coverage. That doesn't exist because you can't predict what a user is going to try to do, or like it's very difficult. So you have to settle for good enough, and ideally just something is better than nothing, and you can build on it. But then you also have not just only like data sets, and if you're going to change the prompt, but also like doing some live evals on like production data as well, like actual user queries that come in, running evals and making sure that something weird isn't happening. There's not some response where it's like giving out really bad information. So some kind of like analysis there on like live data. And this honestly, as much as different as it is, it's also kind of similar to what you do productionizing other apps, right? Like before AI. It's just a little harder to like reason about because it's non-deterministic, right?
Yeah. 100% agree with you that people should be jumping on evals sooner than later in the development process. And like I have to say, personally, I find it a bit scary that so many systems in the world started relying on non-deterministic software in production, and this really makes the quality assurance process tougher. I actually remember like billion of memes of people integrating LLMs into their chatbots, and then people screenshotting like Toyota website selling a car for $1 or whatever. Or I don't know, Amazon shopping assistant writing a React component or whatever. Like people abusing stuff in most bizarre ways. And what do you think um, will happen to quality assurance as a profession as a result of that? Is it going to shift to like eval specialists? Like, is that going to be a thing?
Great question. I don't know. I don't pretend to know. I can, can't, it's hard to predict anything. It feels like we're all building on shaky foundation, meaning that it's moving every day. So who knows what's really in store? It's hard to make, future predictions, but I would anticipate it changes. And I think evals are likely to be a big part of it, because how do you QA a non-deterministic system? Well, you have to figure out some ways, right? There are techniques to try to get some kind of confidence. I do think that, it's also there's a balance around, like, just because you could have something use AI doesn't mean you should. Like, there's still room for a lot of deterministic code. You don't have to, not everything needs to be an LLM call. And even the stuff that is, that you do want to be non-deterministic, or you need kind of like some kind of level of intelligence to make decisions, you can kind of package that around some more deterministic events. So, I mean, that's why in Master we have this concept of workflows and we have agents, and we're kind of have an experimental agent network, but we'll be releasing it here pretty soon. So you kind of have this level of like the agentic spectrum. You can kind of turn the dial of like workflows are pretty deterministic, but you might make calls to like an LLM or maybe an agent in some cases. And then you have agents which can call tools, and you can kind of give it a system prompt or instructions and kind of let it go. And then you have like agent networks, which is like a network of agents working together to try to accomplish something. So you have like the tools, but I think you should always, when possible, lean towards, if you can make it more deterministic, you probably should, because you're going to have better quality. And
Yeah.
maybe the models get good enough, in a 6 months, a year, where we don't have to worry about that, and we don't have to have different prompts for different models. But it does seem like that's still further away than I think some people want it to be.
100% agreed.
I've seen with my own projects and stuff like that, there's definitely places where it's like you could add AI. You could easily add AI or detection or something like that. But then I'm like, well, I don't really need to. If you really think about it, I guess I don't need to add AI, and I guess I could just do like this manual thing, because you want to leave as little mess up area to the AI as possible, because some of these like new apps where everything is determined by the AI, it's like it just blows up on itself because the AI hallucinates some other function call or something like that. It's just absolutely crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's why in a lot of ways, though, coding agents are probably the most popular use of agents, right? Is because you can use the AI to write the deterministic code, right? So it's like you can write more deterministic code, so you can handle more complex use cases maybe than you could have, but you don't have to expose the AI to the end user if you don't have to. But I do see a lot of people trying to pull AI off the shelf because it does help you write less code in a lot of cases, right? Like, oh, I can write this complex routing logic, or I can just let the LLM decide what to do here.
Yeah, kind of scary if you ask me. I wouldn't trust language models to make such decisions in production. I'm going to be honest. I'm always leaning towards leaving as much as possible to the LLM. Maybe I'm too old-fashioned, maybe. By the way, I really am a big fan of the eval primitives available through Mastra for like classifying on different metrics, evaluating and classifying the outputs. I feel like it's really worth checking out for people building with LLMs. This is how you build evals for your products.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I smile because it's also one of the areas that I'm anxious for us to update, to improve. We have so many ideas for how we're going to make that even better. And so it is there, and we have a lot of people using it. But it's just one of those things that we've been kind of staring at long enough and seen enough use cases where we know what version 2 needs to look like to be really, kind of really much more transformative, I guess, much easier to work with, much better APIs for development. And so I'm excited that we're not launching that anytime too soon, but it is in the works, and it is, I don't know exactly when it's going to be ready, but it's going to be significantly better than it even is today. So I'm excited because we've kind of had to like adapt as our customers have grown, right? Like we're seeing more and more use cases that are getting to production. A lot of people like are building these AI agents or AI applications, and it does take a while to get something into production, especially if it's a bigger team. So, us launching kind of or starting this back in October, it really does take, sometimes 3+ months for these bigger teams to launch these bigger projects. And we're starting to get to the point where they're getting further along and closer to production, and evals are now becoming more and more important as they get close to, quote unquote, flipping the switch and making this thing become live. And so I think that, it started to shine a light on the ways that we can actually make evals even better.
Yeah.
Right.
Exciting stuff. Really looking forward to the new updates coming out for evals. Completely unrelated. Gonna change the pace a little bit. We have found through a little grok foo, as we usually do when putting together agenda for our interviews, that you used to be a state wrestling champion, and this is a very random thing. Like, not a lot of founders can say that about themselves. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, very, very random. So Yeah, I mean, I wrestled from, I think I started wrestling when I was in like 4th grade. And so like in middle school, like 6th through 8th grade, I was South Dakota, kind of a small state, but South Dakota state wrestling champion. And then in high school, I was like 3-time I'll say I was on the podium. I never won it in high school, but I was always on the podium pretty much every year. So yeah, just kind of a random fact, but that's a good dig. Good digging
Yeah,
into my past, because
yeah.
it's not
Rock
that
is
public. It really isn't that public. It's not
You would
something
be
I talk
surprised
about.
what Grok finds on people. It's
Yeah.
actually incredible. Like people often not realize how much information is available about them online.
So I might need to get some tips on, because if I invite guests on over to the Master live stream, I might need to figure out how do you all do digging, because I need to do some of that, I think.
It's
Those are-
as easy as going to Grok and clicking deep research. That has been our experience.
Okay.
ChatGPT deep research might also be okay.
deeper research, not just deep. If you give it deeper research, it will like cook. But you got to try to link it to like their name. Obviously, you have a Twitter profile, so it's a little bit easier. But then your name, your social profiles, and then if you have like a website or a LinkedIn profile, that's where it really cooks.
Yeah, I can actually share the prompt that we use. Like you have to provide a few links, the name, a few career experiences, so that it never gets confused about who the hell it's looking up. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, because I do have a pretty common name. It could easily get confused with others with the same name, but that's cool.
Yeah, really, really cool.
So Mastra was backed by YC in the winter batch of 25, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
That's awesome, man. So how was that whole experience, and like what sort of feedback did you get from that? Because obviously YC is pretty competitive, and it's very it's very intense when you're in it, because I've got a couple buddies who are going through it right now, and it's intense.
Yeah, yeah. I'll give the complete my experience with YC. So it was like, all in all, an amazing experience. I will hands down recommend it to anyone that is building something. And if you're building something really cool, let me know. I can always try to give you a recommendation or introduce you to people. I don't know a lot of people, but I know a few people. But it was an incredible experience. I think that it Mastra would not be as far along today if we didn't go through YC. That's just the honest truth. You get there's a very good network effect that you get to be around some like great founders who help generate ideas for you, like help you generate ideas, but also like push you to be better. So I think that and the group partners are great. Now on the flip side, like I'll give you the other side. Like, it's a little bit of a cult. It kind of is, but in a good way, like the right amount of like, like I don't, there's a little bit of cultiness to it. If you talk to YC founders, they probably have the same expression that I did. Like, yes, you should do it, and there's reasons for it, because it is such a good program for getting you introductions to people, helping you out. The network is amazing, because you kind of are part of this network of founders that you immediately can much more easily have conversations with. It does open a lot of doors. But on the flip side, like I said, there's a little bit of this, like, okay, you got to drink the Kool-Aid a little bit, but I think the Kool-Aid tastes pretty damn good, so it's like I'll drink some of the Kool-Aid.
That's a hilarious comparison. But yeah, the networking effect makes a lot of sense. Like they have one of probably the most powerful network available to founders.
Yeah, and I'd highly recommend any founder that at least throw your hat in the ring. Like, you never know. Yeah, I would say, like, as much as there's like patterns of like that you see in the founders there's also just like random, random things that random founders that you're like, how, like, your background would not suggest that you should get in. So it's like they do evaluate everyone, and I think it does help if you know some people that like maybe could help you with if you're doing your application, or that have maybe gone through it. That can be helpful. But I think like there was some founders, I think, from like North Dakota or maybe Iowa in the batch, and I'm from South Dakota, so it's like there's not very many from where we're at, but they do exist. So it doesn't matter like where you came from. A lot of founders, I would say, too, from just out of the United States, that for many reasons they just don't want to, or it don't have the opportunity in where they're from to like really start a company, or maybe they're in somewhere in Europe or whatever, and it's just not as favorable startup community. And so a lot of founders like from outside the US as well. So I don't know, it's worth throwing your hat in the ring. I think it's even just going through the application process is, it's kind of clarifying of like what you're trying to build, and it'll hopefully help you out quite a bit.
100%. They have a pretty cool questionnaire, I have to say. From what I heard, I haven't seen it to myself actually, but what I heard, like there are some very interesting questions, like personally to evaluate. Cool. I am really, really curious to hear your response on sustainability playbook for Mastra. You're an open source project. Open source stars are nice, but dollars are better, right? You got to make some money to survive. And I'm really, really curious what your plan on monetizing the venture is.
Yeah. So we do have a cloud product. It's in private beta now, and there's a button that says request access on the homepage. And the idea is that, at the end of the day, Mastra, we want it to be open source. We want you to be able to build with it, deploy it anywhere. But we also want to make it just really, really easy. If you don't want to have to think about it, you can just click a few buttons and you can have your agent live. So you can build an agent, you can deploy it live, you can have kind of like basic observability and evals all built into one, like one framework, one platform. And so it just makes it a seamless experience. And so while we want to make sure we always maintain that, you can bring, maybe you want to swap. For instance, we give you like master storage. You get a database backend kind of out of the box, which is nice. You can just deploy to our cloud. You don't have to think about storage, and it's just there. But there are like, master storage isn't the best for everything. There are maybe some vector DBs, or maybe you want to run your own Postgres or whatever. So you can just swap that out. And same with like evals, you get, or observability, you get tracing kind of out of the box. But Mastra does a lot of things. So there might be other tracing providers that do things that we don't do, and have kind of like specifically tuned that fit your use case. So you just swap out your observability provider, and you can, we just emit OTel traces, so you can just pipe them into anywhere. So ultimately, we want to kind of provide that batteries included experience, so you don't have to really think about, a lot of architectural decisions, but we give you all the knobs or the, eject points, so you can kind of wire up whatever you want, ensuring that, you can build and deploy Mastra anywhere. It's just really seamless if you just want to do it with us.
Yeah. So you're building like Vercel for Next.js, but cloud for agentic applications, essentially. Would that be accurate?
Yeah. I mean, that's a fairly good summary. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I like to think we kind of have three parts to our cloud platform. We have what we call like our agent runtime, which is like the deployment of your agents. We have kind of observability, which is the eval stuff that we talked about, and like the tracing. And then we also have kind of like the storage, which is like, your database. You could have a vector DB, you could pull in your own data and not have to worry about any of that stuff. So we kind of give you those three things out of the box. But yeah, it's all it's kind of somewhat similar.
Right. So with all this kind of pivoting back to some of your personal stuff, you do a lot of little live tutorials and workshops and stuff like that. How do you go and like quickly find a topic that you want to cover and then cover it like super quickly? What's your sort of workflow for that?
Yeah, I wish there was a secret, but the secret is literally we kind of have this bias towards action. So like we used to do a bunch of video content where I was just like, I would always like be walking in San Francisco, and I just do a bunch of walking videos where I just talk about an AI topic, and then I started bringing guests on. And then eventually that turned into like, we're doing all these live streams and live workshops. And I think, we take a lot of like ideas from just what's happening. So like MCP was very popular, so we wanted to make sure we had a very good MCP story. A to A is another protocol that not nearly as popular as MCP, but we wanted to make sure we had a story around that. So we do lean into what we're kind of seeing in with the customers we're talking to, but also like what we see on, X or Twitter, just like you all probably do as well. So I think we get a lot of the stuff from that, but then also we try to have some good content around what we see our customers trying to build. So it helps future people like them. It helps them kind of learn how to build in these new like AI applications and agents. And then we also try to make sure we have good content around what we call like the master primitives, which would be like workflows and agents and evals and RAG and those types of things.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. You guys are cranking out a lot of content, and I would argue like it's very, very useful for audience. So kudos on that. If someone wants to go from zero to hero on agentic software development, where should they start? It's a relatively fresh topic, so a lot of people might be unsure.
There's a ton of good resources out there. One of the challenges I think is just picking something and sticking with it, because there's so much content being created. It kind of depends on what like I do have kind of a background in like also teaching and education. So it kind of depends on how you like to learn. Some people like to watch videos and, some people like to consume content like this, right? Like live streams and get to know like kind of behind the scenes, like how people think about things. There's like obviously some really good courses that are out there. I think if you like to read, which, maybe less and less people like to do these days, but there's still some of us out there. My co-founder, Sam, wrote a book on, it's very short. It's like the new version is going to be a little bit longer. We're about to release it, but there's like it's less than 100 pages. So it's a high level overview. It does, of course, like show a little bit of master code for examples, but it's mostly around just like general building AI application principles. And so and that's free. You can go to master.ai/book and you can just get a digital copy of the book. And then I think that's just a good starting spot because it's, again, just talks through some like basic principles of thinking about building AI applications. It's not going to get you all the way there though, but it will get you into like knowing the concepts. And I think that's part of the problem is like knowing what questions to ask. Right? It's like, how do you get far enough to know what types of questions you can ask? We are at Mastra, we're about to release a course, which is going to be pretty cool. So if you are looking to get started specifically with Mastra and you made the decision that, okay, like I would always recommend learn a little bit about how LLMs work before you grab a framework off the shelf. Because I think if you don't understand at least some of the core principles, you're going to get lost pretty quick. And you might get far, but you might not understand what you're building. So I do always think that having a little bit of knowledge of just like calling an LLM directly and just seeing a result, whether that's through like, curl or postman or something, like just understand that like you can call this machine, this API somewhere and you can get a response. Like you should understand how that works a little bit and how tokens work and context windows and all those things. But again, the book does go over some of that stuff. And there's obviously a lot of other, I think, pretty good courses out there if you start to get a little further along.
Yeah, I think that core understanding of just in like anything, but especially with AI, like knowing tokens, knowing all that other stuff, it's really, really helpful to like build on like a agentic framework or just even working with like AI tools like Cursor or Windsurf. It gives you like that little bit of insight, but that's super cool. Yeah, that's super helpful. So this is going to be probably the hardest question yet. Because the way that AI and everything is moving is so fast. If we fast forward 3 years, what's one thing that nobody is talking about in AI agents that's going to matter a ton?
That nobody's talking about. Now that is, I do think there's already people thinking like 5 years ahead. So that no one's, that's a tough question. I mean, I think I can probably name some things that people aren't talking about enough. Maybe we can start there. And maybe if I think as I'm talking through that, I can get to what no one's talking about quite yet.
That works.
So I think one of the things is like, there's, of course, is like, I think there's this natural fear of like job displacement and all that. Right. And so I think that is like in any tech wave, there's always a fear that like the computers are going to take the jobs. Right. But I always, in this, maybe this one's different. Like you never know, but I do think that it's more likely to just like increase productivity rather than completely displace, human jobs, at least in the near 5 to, hopefully 10 years. Right. I think it's more of we can be so much more productive using these tools. And so now productivity gains are incredible. And yes, there will be job losses in certain industries where now people have to find different jobs. But I think like one of the things that we should be talking about is like, what are those next jobs going to be? And I don't know what they're going to be yet, but I do think that like people that know how to use AI tools specifically, and obviously understand how LLMs work and how AI agents work, are going to be much better equipped for whatever those future jobs are going to be. So, like the near term is like you're not going to be replaced by AI most likely in the near term, but you're going to be replaced by someone probably using AI because they can do the job maybe faster than you. Especially, like I think about just all the cool tools that are coming out that maybe are not quite production ready yet, but there may be 1 or 2 model iterations from like more and more use cases being production ready. So again, I would say, like, I think people need to should be starting to talk about like what's the next wave of jobs, and I don't know what they are yet, so I can't really predict 3 years in the future. But I think there's going to be like new jobs that we don't yet even understand that are going to be coming out in the next next couple of years. And then a lot of the people, ideally, that if they're getting displaced from some jobs, will be able to pick up skills to like use these AI tools and do unique things to really like enhance human productivity significantly. So I'd say like it's both exciting and like, a little bit scary, but mostly, in my opinion, mostly exciting.
Right. Yeah. No, I think but that's the hard part. It's like you can't really tell because like you wouldn't even be able to tell in like a week, like Grok 3.5 is apparently right on the edge of releasing, and then so is like GPT-5, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's like you never know. And like if one provider were to launch something, then another provider would launch in response to that. It would just be absolutely horrible. But yeah.
One other thing that I always hear is like people keep saying, well, the models aren't that good yet, or they're still not good enough. But I would also argue if the models never got any better than they are today, like it can't solve maybe all the use cases that people are trying, but there's an incredible amount of things that it can still do, even if they didn't get any better than they are today. And they will get better. I also, like my hot take is like, I think a lot of people think the rate of progress is speeding up. I think it might be slightly slowing down. Like, I don't know, prove me wrong, model providers, please prove me wrong. But I think it's slowing down a little bit. It's like, it's starting to get more iterative, and the changes are, like I just think that from 3 to 3.5 was a bigger jump than Sonnet 3.5 to 3.7 or 3.7 to 4.0, right? It's just like seems like the gaps are slightly less, but there are a lot of things that get unlocked by even slight increases. So
I think we need a sort of jump in the way that we went from non-reasoning to reasoning models, because that was a pretty big jump when like O1 was released. And they were like, hey, it can reason now. And I don't know what that next jump is. Maybe that's parallel reasoning with like communication between the two agents or something like that. But I feel like we're definitely hitting this plateau where, once again, we're running out of training data, we're running out of compute, and there needs to be some leap to begin to scale infinitely again type thing.
Yeah, if you think about OpenAI's stages of AI development, right, from 1 to 5, I don't know if you've seen it: chatbots, reasoners, agents, innovators, and organizations. I think that's a pretty reasonable stepping system to use here.
Yeah. I'm not that familiar with it. I've definitely heard of it, but one thing I am kind of curious about is like, and this is me, and I don't have a machine learning background. Like, I don't know if either of you do, but I definitely don't. So but I also wonder is next token completion, is that going to get us all the way to, quote unquote AGI? And, the definition of AGI is going to shift just like the definition of agent has shifted and eventually becomes marketing. But, there might be layers. There's probably layers to this, right? It's probably, next token, like LLM prediction on, tied with some more like traditional ML, that maybe, these more complex systems end up kind of coming together and creating whatever the next thing is that's, potentially beyond or just a reasoning model or whatever. So, and again, I'm not in the know on any of that stuff, right? But I do think that I do just question on, can you get fully to AGI on just next token completion? And maybe you can. Maybe you might. Maybe that's as simple as humans are. Maybe we're just like next token completion machines. I don't know. if you have the right memories and everything, maybe you actually can get to that. But I also like maybe question if you can.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. We're approaching the end of the hour, so we're gonna try to wrap things up here. We always ask this question at the end. I don't know if you heard of it, but we'll ask you the same thing. What is the one piece of advice you would share with yourself from 10 years ago?
There is a correct answer.
Yes, and I will be honest. I did see a tweet, so I think I know the answer.
No.
But I can share a story as well
Ooh,
along with this
even
answer.
better.
So, yeah, I think personally, I would just ultimately just tell myself like keep going. Like I think that's just good at life advice. But the right answer, I think, is like probably just invest a lot of money in Bitcoin. But I did candidly hear that from I think David Kramer maybe. He
Yep.
said that on a podcast, which he was actually on our live stream too a while back.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, but I do have a story. So when this was 2010 when I was doing I was doing like all those YouTube videos and things. I think it was 2010. Someone sent me $5 of Bitcoin, and I didn't know what to do with it. And so it was 2010, and I tried to, like, it was from some probably shady exchange that I've tried to find the email. Like I had to claim it and I didn't, so it's probably long gone. I've never been able to find it, but I don't know what $5 of Bitcoin in 2010 would be worth today. But if I had it, I probably wouldn't need to be
I'm
here.
looking it up right now. Hold on.
I honestly
Goose,
don't
take the
want.
next question while I
I
take
don't
this.
really want to know because I've looked it up in the past, like years ago, and it just made me mad, like 5 years ago. So I try not to think about it. But if I had my like if I wasn't so heads down just trying to build customer websites and put out like free educational content, and I would have said like actually do some research, because eventually like I do I like Bitcoin. I'm relatively like pay attention to crypto now, but it took me years to like of hearing about it, just like a lot of you, before I actually paid attention. And so if I would have paid attention when someone first sent me like here's a tip for all the great content, and I was like, what is this Bitcoin thing? Like I don't have any idea what this is. It's only $5. I just ignored it. So I never like claimed it on the exchange or whatever. And I'm sure that exchange went under, right? I would have had to like pull it into a wallet. So it's long gone. But
So would you
It
like
would be
to know?
worth a lot of money.
I just calculated it. Would you like to know how much your
sure.
your pain is?
Yeah, just
So Bitcoin in 2010 had a price of 30 cents per coin, which if you had $5 of Bitcoin at that valuation, you would currently be sitting on $1.8 million of Bitcoin
Yes.
nowadays, which is crazy.
that is that sucks, but it is what it is. I've come to
Right?
terms with it. And I remember the message, like, and it was from an email I don't even have access to anymore because it was from the web agency I was at the time. And it was like, hey, thanks for all the content. Buy a coffee or a beer. And something like that. And just nuts. I wonder if that guy wishes he never sent me that $5.
Right? Yeah.
Look at
It's
that. He's like,
oh.
I sent this random person $5. That was worth so much money. I imagine if he was sending around Bitcoin, he probably had enough where it didn't matter, but who knows?
Yeah. It's just here you go, casual to mills on your coffee,
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, missed. That reminds me of another story where it was like the guy who like won 5 Bitcoin as like the fifth place prize at like some game competition, and it would be worth like again like $600,000, and it's just like, oh my gosh, man, that is just crazy. Like I could have, if I had known about that, I could have told my parents to buy like 1,000 Bitcoin, and just who knows what that would be worth now.
Yeah. So maybe the correct answer for me is if I could go back, just like the answer is just claim that Bitcoin that the guy sent you, just
Right.
like he sent it to you, just claim it, whatever you need to do, go through the shady website and claim the Bitcoin and put it in a wallet somewhere.
It's worth it. Yeah. Well, this will be our last thing. So where can people find your work and dive into Mastra and everything like that? This is your 1 minute to plug yourself.
Yeah, I mean, you can go to mastra.ai, learn what we're doing, follow us on all the socials that you can easily find us on. You can find me, SM Thomas 3 on X, connect with me on LinkedIn as well. And yeah, ultimately pretty active on, I would say X is the best channel if you want to chat with me. My DMs are typically open. So, let me know what also, we do quite a bit of live streaming ourselves on over at Mastra. So we do what we call our AI agents hour, where we try to keep track of like what's going on in AI news. We show some code. We like to show code. We show some demos. We bring on guests of people who are building in the AI space, specifically around like dev tools and AI agents and all that. And so we do that almost every day for about an hour, sometimes a little bit more, but we're basically live streaming almost every day. So if you follow me on X, or you follow the Mastra account, or find us on YouTube, you will see that.
Nice. Well, there you go. You heard it here first. But yeah, man, thanks for coming on. It's been a great episode. Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, it was fun. Great chatting, guys.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning in today to today's episode of NextDev FM, and everyone have a great night, and we will see you later.
Cheers.